The chilled air of the Gilded Spoon was a world away from the biting November wind outside. It was a manufactured climate of quiet wealth, where the clinking of silver on porcelain was the loudest sound and the scent of truffle oil hung in the air like expensive perfume. Julian Croft, CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, felt perfectly at home. He adjusted the cuff of his custom-tailored Brioni suit, the fabric a whisper against his skin, and glanced across the table at his junior vice president, Marcus Thorne. "The Synapse lens is performing at 99.8% efficiency," Julian said, his voice low and confident. He wasn't looking at Marcus, but rather through him, his gaze fixed on the subtle data overlays only he could see. The augmented reality contact lens was his masterpiece, the flagship product that translated languages in real time, identified individuals through facial recognition, and cross-referenced them with every available public database. It was the key to the Yamato Corporation deal, a multi-billion-dollar merger that would cement his legacy. "Incredible, Julian." "Truly," Marcus gushed, his own eyes darting around nervously. He was a man perpetually in awe and fear of his boss. Julian's gaze swept the room, the lens feeding him information. He saw the net worth of the banker at table 3, the political affiliation of the woman dining by the window, the recent stock trades of the man at the bar. Information was power, and Julian Croft was the most powerful man in any room he entered. Then his eyes landed on their waitress. Her name, according to the lens, was Ilara Vance. Age, 28. Status, no college degree on record, no social media presence, no digital footprint to speak of beyond basic government records. She was an anomaly, an analog ghost in his digital world. She moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of exhaustion, her shoulders slightly slumped. But it was her clothes that drew Julian's contemptuous focus. She wore the standard black uniform of the restaurant, but over it, a faded pilled cardigan, the color of old moss. It was clean but hopelessly worn, the cuffs frayed, a small, inexpertly mended tear near the elbow. Ilara approached their table, a polite, practiced smile on her face. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I take your order, or would you care for another moment?" Julian didn't look at her face. He looked at the cardigan. He leaned towards Marcus, his voice a stage whisper designed to be overheard. "Look at that, Marcus, a relic. Probably smells of mothballs and regret. Can you imagine showing up to a place like this, representing it, dressed in something a grandmother would use to line a cat bed?" Marcus let out a choked, sycophantic laugh. "I see what you mean, sir. Not exactly the pinnacle of haute couture." The small smile on Ilara's face didn't vanish, but it froze, becoming a brittle mask. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown that Julian's lens had failed to analyze for any emotional data, flickered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of such profound hurt that it should have registered as a seismic event. But to Julian, she was just a blurry data point, an insignificant variable. He had already dismissed her. "We'll have the Wagyu, medium rare," Julian said, waving a dismissive hand in her direction, "and a bottle of the 82 Petrus. I trust you know the one." "Of course, sir." Ilara's voice was perfectly even, a testament to a will forged in the fires of countless indignities. She gathered their menus, her fingers brushing against the worn wool of her sleeve as she did. For a moment, her gaze lingered on the intricate, almost invisible pattern woven into the cuff of the cardigan. A pattern of interlocking cranes and cherry blossoms. A memory of her grandmother's hands, nimble and sure, guiding a needle through the yarn. A memory of a different life. She turned and walked away, her back straight, leaving Julian Croft to his wine and his casual cruelty. He never noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she keyed in his order. He was already focused on the next day, on the Yamato deal, on the flawless digital future he was building. He had no idea that the past, embodied in a threadbare cardigan, was about to bring his entire world crashing down. The Ethereum Dynamics headquarters was less an office building and more a monument to Julian Croft's ego. It was a gleaming tower of glass and steel that pierced the skyline, a place where sunlight was filtered through smart glass and the air was recycled to a perfect, sterile humidity. Julian stood in the main conference room on the 80th floor, the city sprawling beneath him like a circuit board. This was his domain. The Japanese delegation from Yamato Corporation arrived at precisely 9 a.m. They were led by Mr. Kaito Tanaka, a man in his late 70s with a face like a carved no mask and an aura of immense, unshakable authority. He wore a simple, dark and exquisitely cut suit, but he carried himself with the gravitas of a shogun. At his side was his granddaughter, Yumi Tanaka, a woman in her early 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a sleek black bob. She was their lead engineer, the bridge between her grandfather's old-world business philosophy and the cutting-edge technology they sought. "Mr. Croft," Mr. Tanaka said, his bow shallow but respectful. Yumi bowed more deeply. "Mr. Tanaka, Ms. Tanaka, welcome to Etherian," Julian replied, offering a crisp Western handshake. His synapse lens was in overdrive, feeding him a stream of flawless Japanese translation. He felt the familiar surge of power. Language barriers were for lesser men. "Your facility is impressive," Mr. Tanaka said, his translated voice smooth in Julian's ear. His eyes, however, were unreadable. They swept over the holographic displays, the minimalist furniture, and the panoramic views with a disconcerting lack of reaction. Julian launched into his presentation. He was a master showman, weaving a narrative of technological inevitability. He demonstrated their predictive market algorithms, their automated logistics software, and their quantum-encrypted communication network. Marcus stood by, nodding enthusiastically at every pause, a well-dressed bobblehead. Yumi asked several pointed questions about data latency and encryption protocols, her inquiries sharp and precise. Julian answered them all with ease, his lens providing him with the necessary technical data in a subtle overlay. He was winning. He could feel it. "And now," Julian announced, arriving at his grand finale, "the technology that makes seamless global partnership possible. The Synapse lens." He gestured to his own eye. "I have been speaking to you through it this entire time. It offers flawless, instantaneous translation. It is the end of misunderstanding. It is the future of communication." Mr. Tanaka remained impassive, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "A remarkable tool, Mr. Croft. Technology that can bridge the gap between tongues is indeed valuable. But true understanding is more than just a matter of words." A chill, faint and unwelcome, snaked its way down Julian's spine. "I'm not sure I follow. My grandfather believes that technology must respect the kokoro, the heart, the spirit, of that which it seeks to improve," Yumi explained, her English perfect and unaccented. Mr. Tanaka nodded. "To that end, we have a final test. The heart of our company is our legacy software, a system built over decades. Your AI must integrate with it, not simply replace it. It must understand its spirit." He gestured to Yumi, who produced a sleek data slate. With a tap, she projected a block of code onto the massive screen at the front of the room. Julian's confidence surged back. Code was his native language. He'd been reading it since he was 12. His lens would pass this in a nanosecond. But as the image resolved on the screen, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just code, it was a chaotic, beautiful, impossible tapestry. Lines of C++ and Python were interwoven with elegant, flowing columns of Japanese kanji. But it wasn't modern, printed kanji. It was an archaic calligraphic script rendered with the grace of a master's brush. And nestled in the very center of the code, breaking all rules of syntax and structure, was what appeared to be a poem. 3 short lines. Julian's synapse lens flickered. A string of error messages, invisible to everyone else, flashed in his vision. Error, unrecognized script. Error, syntax mismatch. Error, cultural context not found. The flawless Japanese translation in his ear dissolved into a garbled, static hiss. The beautiful characters on the screen became meaningless squiggles. His technological crutch, the very foundation of his confidence, had shattered. The room was silent. Mr. Tanaka watched him, his old eyes missing nothing. Yumi's gaze was sharp, analytical. She knew he was bluffing. "Well, Mr. Croft?" Mr. Tanaka's voice was quiet, but it echoed in the cavernous silence. "What does our heart say to you?" Julian's own heart hammered against his ribs. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The multi-billion-dollar deal, his legacy, his entire self-image as a technological titan. It was all dissolving into a screen of incomprehensible symbols. He was blind, deaf, and utterly humiliatingly lost. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Julian. He felt a bead of sweat trace a path down his temple. The lens in his eye was now displaying a frantic kaleidoscope of error warnings and corrupted data packets. It was like trying to read a book while trapped inside a broken television. He tried to force a reboot, a sequence of 3 long blinks, but nothing happened. The system was completely overwhelmed. It's a highly complex piece of proprietary encryption, Julian managed to say, his voice a tight, unnatural rasp. He was trying to buy time, to bluff his way through the technological abyss that had opened at his feet. Our AI will need a moment to pass the unique structural paradigms. Yumi Tanaka tilted her head, a gesture of polite skepticism that felt like a dagger. The structure is the meaning, Mr. Croft. It is not something to be passed, but to be understood. Can your machine understand it? Julian's mouth was dry. He glanced at Marcus, who looked pale enough to faint. His junior VP was a mirror of his own terror, offering no support, no ideas, just wide-eyed panic. The silence in the room stretched, becoming thin and brittle. It was the sound of a billion-dollar deal evaporating. Perhaps, Mr. Tanaka said, his voice gentle but firm, we should take a short recess, to allow your systems to recalibrate. It was a lifeline, but a humiliating one. He was being sent to a corner like a schoolboy who couldn't solve a math problem. Yes, an excellent idea, Julian said, grabbing the opportunity with clumsy desperation. A 10-minute recess. The moment the Tanakas had been escorted to an adjacent lounge by a flustered Marcus, Julian ripped the useless lens from his eye. His vision swam for a moment, the world suddenly flat and devoid of data overlays. He felt naked, primitive. He stormed out of the boardroom, pacing the plush hallway like a caged tiger, his mind racing. He had backup translators, of course, human ones. But to bring one in now would be an admission of catastrophic failure. His entire pitch was based on the supremacy of his technology. To admit it had a blind spot, a fatal one, was to admit that his company's core philosophy was a lie. Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, a different kind of transaction was taking place. Ilara Vance pushed a stainless steel catering cart through the service corridors of the Etherean Tower. The Gilded Spoon had a lucrative corporate catering contract, and today's lunch order was for the VIP meeting on the 80th floor. It was their most expensive package. Bento boxes filled with sashimi, wagyu tataki, and delicate tamagoyaki. The irony of serving the same food to a corporate board that her tormentor from the previous night had ordered was not lost on her. She navigated the silent, opulent hallways, feeling as out of place as her worn cardigan. This was a world of frictionless surfaces and invisible technology, and she was a creature of texture, of mended seams and calloused hands. She was here to do her job, keep her head down, and get the paycheck that would cover another round of her younger brother Leo's expensive medication. That was the mantra that got her through each day. She reached the designated staging area, a small alcove just outside the main conference room. The heavy glass doors were slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see the massive presentation screen which had been left on. Her instructions were to set up the lunch service and wait to be called in. As she arranged the elegant lacquer bento boxes on the cart, her eyes were drawn to the screen. She froze. The cart handle grew slick in her grip. On the screen was the code, the impossible, beautiful code, but to Ilara it wasn't impossible at all. It was familiar. It was like seeing a ghost from a life she had been forced to abandon. Her mind flew back in time to a sun-drenched room that smelled of old paper and green tea. Her grandmother Obasan sat at a low table, a brush in her wrinkled hand. Ilara, a university student hungry for knowledge, sat beside her. She had been a doctoral candidate in East Asian studies. Her thesis focused on the intersection of classical Japanese poetry and early computational logic. Her grandmother, a master calligrapher, was her primary source, her wellspring of knowledge. Language is not just a tool, Ilara-chan, her grandmother had told her, her voice as soft as worn silk. It is a house. Each character is a room filled with history, art, and spirit. To only know the modern meaning is to stand in the doorway. You must go inside to understand. Obasan had taught her the old scripts, the flowing, poetic forms of kanji that had fallen out of common use. She had shown her how the masters could hide meanings within meanings, how the stroke order of a character could imply a second, hidden narrative. They had spent hours translating ancient texts, including the works of the Zen monks who saw mathematics and logic as a form of poetry, a path to enlightenment. Then the world had collapsed. A car accident had stolen her parents. Her brother Leo's dormant genetic condition had flared up, requiring round-the-clock care and treatments that their insurance barely touched. Her PhD, her research, her life of the mind. It had all been sacrificed on the altar of necessity. She'd taken the first job she could get, then another and another, until she was here. A waitress in a threadbare cardigan, serving lunch to the very people who lived in the world she had dreamed of joining. The cardigan itself was one of the last things her grandmother had knitted for her. A tangible link to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Staring at the screen, Ilara felt the years of suppressed knowledge bubble to the surface. She saw the lines of C++, but she also saw the kanji woven through them. And in the center, the poem. Furu ike ya, kawazu tobikomu. Mizu no oto, Basho's most famous haiku. The old pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of water. But she saw more than a poem. She saw what her grandmother had taught her to see. A house with many rooms, and she knew, with a certainty that made her shiver, that she held the key. Julian ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time all day. He was out of options. His pride was a lead weight in his stomach. He had to call in a human translator. He would spin it as a desire for human nuance, a pre-planned part of the presentation. It was a weak, pathetic lie, and he knew Mr. Tanaka would see right through it. The deal was dead. He turned to head back to the boardroom to face the music and stopped short. The caterer, the waitress from the restaurant last night. She was standing by her cart, but her attention was fixed, utterly rapt, on the screen inside the boardroom, on his problem, on his failure. A surge of irrational anger flared in Julian's chest. The indignity of it all was too much. His billion-dollar tech had failed, his deal was collapsing, and this nobody, this relic in her shabby sweater, was standing there gawking at the wreckage of his career. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped, his voice sharp and cold. "This is a private meeting. Get your lunch ready and wait until you're called. Don't stare at things that don't concern you." Ilara didn't seem to hear him. Her focus was absolute. She took a half step closer to the doorway, her head tilted. Her lips moved, and a soft murmur reached him, a sound completely alien in this sterile, silent corridor. "The old pond," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "A frog jumps in. The sound of water." Julian froze. He recognized the words. The synapse lens, in its final moments before crashing, had managed a crude, literal translation of the haiku. But it had been stripped of all context, a meaningless fragment in a sea of gibberish. Hearing it now from her was a profound shock. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice dropping. Ilara finally turned to look at him. For the first time, he wasn't looking at her clothes, but at her face. Her eyes were clear, bright, and possessed a depth he couldn't fathom. The tired professional mask was gone, replaced by an intense academic focus. "It's a haiku by Matsuo Basho," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But it's not just a poem. It's the master key. It's the entire architecture of the code in 17 syllables." Julian stared at her, dumbfounded. "Architecture? It's a poem about a frog." "No," she said, shaking her head. She pointed a finger with a short, unmanicured nail, towards the screen. "Look, the kanji used for old pond. Furu ike. They're an archaic form. They don't just mean an old body of water. In certain pre-Meiji-era engineering texts, that combination of characters was used to describe a closed, self-contained legacy system, a dormant database. The pond is their server." Julian's mind struggled to keep up. He was a man who thought in megahertz and petabytes, not in pre-Meiji engineering texts. "And the frog?" he asked, the word feeling ridiculous on his tongue. The frog, kawazu, is the external element, Ilara continued, her passion for the subject overriding any sense of intimidation. It's the intruder, it's your AI, it's the new code seeking to enter the closed system. The verb, tobekomu, means to jump in, to plunge. It implies a forceful singular action, a single authentication request. The door to the lounge opened and Mr. Tanaka and Yumi emerged, followed by a pale-looking Marcus. They had intended to return to the boardroom, but stopped when they saw the CEO locked in an intense conversation with the caterer in the hallway. Ilara didn't notice them. She was completely absorbed. And the final line, she said, her voice filled with reverence. Mizu no oto. The sound of water. That's the most beautiful part. It's the system's response. It's not a password or a string of data. It's an acknowledgement. A successful handshake protocol. The system doesn't just let you in, it confirms your presence has been integrated, that you have become part of the pond, that you have changed its nature. The code isn't a wall to be broken down, it's a conversation to be had. Silence. Julian stared from Ilara to the screen and back again. The random, chaotic symbols began to swim into a terrifying, elegant logic. A logic his machines could never have grasped. It was Yumi who broke the silence. She stepped forward, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension and utter astonishment. She's right, Yumi breathed, looking at her grandfather. The handshake protocol, the sound of water. It's a feedback loop based on the resonant frequency of the initial query. It's quantum. Mr. Tanaka walked slowly towards Ilara, his gaze no longer unreadable. It was filled with a profound and startling respect. He looked from her face to the worn, moss-colored cardigan she wore. He reached out a hand, but did not touch it. He simply indicated the intricate pattern of cranes and blossoms on the cuff. That weaving style, he said, his voice quiet. It is from the Kaga province. Very old. My own grandmother was from there. Ilara looked down at her sleeve, a blush rising on her cheeks. It was my grandmother's, she said softly. She taught me. Julian Croft stood frozen in the hallway of his glass tower, a ghost at a feast. He looked at the woman he had mocked, the woman in her grandmother's sweater, and realized with a sickening, soul-crushing certainty that she held the key not only to the code, but to his entire future. And he had treated her like dirt. The dynamic in the hallway had shifted so completely it felt as if gravity itself had been reoriented. Julian Croft, the master of this universe, was now a peripheral figure. The center of everything was Ilara Vance, the caterer, who stood not as a servant, but as a scholar, holding the attention of the very people Julian had been so desperate to impress. Mr. Tanaka's expression hardened, the brief moment of warmth replaced by a formal chill. Mr. Croft, the recess is over. We will conclude our business now. He gestured for everyone, including Ilara, to re-enter the boardroom. The command was spoken to Julian, but the invitation in his eyes was for her alone. A pathetic flicker of hope ignited in Julian's chest. She had solved it. He was saved. He followed them back into the room, his mind already spinning narratives of how he had cleverly incorporated this human element into his presentation. Marcus, seeing a potential recovery, began ushering other Etherian executives back into the room to witness what he assumed would be the final signing. Once inside, Ilara stood near the screen, a quiet confidence radiating from her. Mr. Tanaka did not take his seat. He stood in the center of the room, his presence dominating the space. For 50 years, Mr. Tanaka began, his voice resonating with cold authority, Western companies have come to us. They see our efficiency, our market share. They translate our words, but they never understand our heart. They see a pond, but they do not hear the sound of the water. He looked directly at Julian, his eyes like chips of obsidian. Your technology is remarkable, Mr. Croft, but it is deaf, it is empty, it lacks kokoro, it lacks a soul. A tool without a soul is just a weapon, and a man without a soul is just a monster. Julian's manufactured smile faltered, crumbling from his face. This was not the preamble to a deal. This was a condemnation. I confess, Mr. Tanaka continued, I had my doubts about your company's philosophy. A philosophy that believes human connection can be reduced to an algorithm. He then turned his gaze to Ilara. But the true test of a company's soul is not in its code, but in its people, in how its leader treats those he believes have no power over him. The room was utterly silent. Marcus Thorne's face had gone from pale to translucent. The other executives shifted in their expensive chairs, the leather squeaking in the tense quiet. It was Yumi who delivered the final devastating blow. She stepped forward, her expression one of icy disappointment. "Mr. Croft, my grandfather and I were also dining at the Gilded Spoon last night," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We were at the table by the window. We saw everything. We heard everything." She paused, letting the words sink in, letting Julian's blood run cold. "We heard you call her sweater a relic that smells of mothballs and regret. We heard you compare something handmade with love to a cat bed." Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. He pictured the scene, his sneering whisper, Marcus's sycophantic laugh, the frozen mask on Ilara's face. All of it witnessed. All of it now repeated for his entire executive team to hear. "And you see," Yumi continued, a dangerous glint in her eye, "I recognized her. Ilara Vance was the most brilliant doctoral candidate in my university's East Asian Studies program 5 years ago. Her work on computational linguistics and classical poetry was groundbreaking. We were colleagues. Friends." She looked at Ilara with a profound, rediscovered warmth. "I had lost touch. I did not know what had become of her, but I never forgot her mind, a mind you were too arrogant to see past a piece of clothing." The twist of the knife was exquisite. Julian hadn't just insulted a waitress, he had belittled a peer of the very woman he was trying to impress, a scholar whose intellect dwarfed his own in the one area that mattered. "This test, Mr. Croft," Yumi said, gesturing to the screen, "was not just for your AI. When I saw you treat a woman of her caliber with such contempt, I changed the parameters. I knew Ilara's catering company had the contract here. I hoped, a small hope, a test of fate, that she might see this, that she might be the one to show you what your machine and your philosophy could never understand." It was a trap, a beautiful, elegant, poetic trap, and he had walked into it with all the blind arrogance of a king who believed himself a god. "Your machine failed the technical test," Mr. Tanaka declared, his voice a final judgment. "And you, Mr. Croft, failed the human one. You have no respect. Your company has no soul. Yamato Corporation will not be entering into any partnership with Etherian Dynamics. The deal is off." The words struck Julian with the force of a physical impact. The air left his lungs. Billions of dollars, his legacy, his reputation, all incinerated in a moment of casual cruelty. He looked around the room at the faces of his executives. He saw shock, dawning horror, and in Marcus's eyes, the terrified scrambling of a rat on a sinking ship. There was no support, only the reflection of his own colossal failure. "But," Julian stammered, his voice a pathetic croak, his composure shattering like glass. He took a step forward, his hands outstretched in a gesture of desperate pleading. "But she solved it. We can incorporate her. We can fix this." He turned to Ilara, his eyes wild, the cool confidence of the CEO replaced by the raw panic of a drowning man. "Ms. Vance, Ilara, I'll give you anything. A job, a department, chief innovation officer, a 7-figure salary, stock options. Whatever you want. I apologize, I was wrong. Please, don't let me lose this because of a stupid mistake." Ilara looked at him, and for the first time he saw no trace of the weary waitress or the focused academic. He saw a woman fully in her power. There was no anger in her eyes, only a calm, sorrowful clarity that was more damning than any rage. "An apology born of desperation is not an apology, Mr. Croft. It's a negotiation," she said, her voice even and strong, cutting through his frantic babble. "You don't regret what you did. You regret that you got caught. You see me now because you need me. You didn't see me last night when I was just a woman in a sweater pouring your wine. Your lens can identify a face, but it can't see a person. That is your failure, not the code, you." Mr. Tanaka stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Ilara's shoulder. "Ms. Vance does not need a job from you, Mr. Croft. Yamato Corporation, however, would be honored to create the Vance Tanaka Foundation, a multi-million-dollar endowment to fund her independent research. Furthermore, we will establish a new division within Yamato, the Kokoro Initiative, dedicated to the ethical integration of technology and the humanities. A division we would be privileged to have her lead, once her doctorate is complete. He bowed, a deep, formal bow of profound respect, to Ilara. The world needs your wisdom, Vance-sensei. Ilara's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. The life she thought was lost forever was being handed back to her, more brilliant than she had ever dreamed. She looked at her worn cardigan, at the mended tear near the elbow. A mended thing is stronger in the broken places. Yumi smiled and stood beside her. It's good to see you again, Ilara. You too, Yumi, Ilara whispered, a genuine smile finally breaking through. The Tanakas and Ilara turned and walked out of the boardroom. They did not look back. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind them, the sound as final as a gavel strike. For a long moment, the room was a vacuum. Julian stood in the wreckage of his ambition, the impossible code still glowing on the screen behind him, a monument to his failure. Then the silence was broken, not by an explosion, but by the slow, deliberate sound of a single person clapping. It was Marcus Thorne. He rose from his chair, a venomous, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Well, Julian," he said, the sycophantic sir gone forever. "That was quite a performance, a masterclass in self-immolation." Julian whirled on him, his face a mask of purple fury. This is your fault. You were supposed to vet them, to know every detail." A harsh, incredulous laugh escaped Marcus's lips. "My fault? My fault you decided to bully a waitress in a 5-star restaurant? I did my job. I got them in the room. Your job was to have a product that worked and a personality that wasn't repulsive. You failed on both counts." He straightened his tie, his demeanor shifting from a frightened subordinate to a circling shark. "For years I've watched you, Julian. Watched you treat people like data points. Watched you rule by fear. I knew it was just a matter of time before your arrogance wrote a check your technology couldn't cash. I just had to be patient." The other executives, who had been frozen in their seats, began to stir. The spell of Julian Croft was broken. They were no longer acolytes at the feet of a genius. They were shareholders watching their net worth plummet. "He's right," said a steely-eyed woman from the finance department, her voice cutting. "My entire division's projections were based on this merger. Our stock is going to tank the second this news gets out." "Gets out?" Marcus sneered, pulling out his phone. He held it up for all to see. He was already on a conference call. "It's already out. I'm on the line with the board, and a few friends at the Wall Street Journal. The official story is that the Synapse lens had a catastrophic failure, and the CEO's personal conduct was incompatible with Yamato's corporate culture." He looked up, his eyes cold and reptilian. "The company needs a scapegoat, Julian, and you just volunteered." The betrayal was so swift, so complete, it left Julian breathless. Two imposing figures in sharp suits appeared at the boardroom door. Etherian security. They didn't look at anyone but Marcus, who gave them a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "I've convened an emergency session of the board, Julian," Marcus said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "By unanimous vote, you are being removed as CEO for cause, effective immediately. Gross misconduct, fiduciary negligence. Take your pick. Your access has been revoked." As if on cue, the massive data screens on the walls, which moments before had been displaying Etherian's triumphant branding, flickered. A red arrow appeared next to the company's stock ticker, AETD. It pointed down, sharply. The numbers began to cascade, falling so fast it looked like a hemorrhage. 15%, 25%, 40%. Each percentage point represented billions in vaporized wealth, years of his work turning to ash. Julian made a choked sound in the back of his throat. "Mr. Croft," one of the security men said, his voice polite but unyielding, "we'll need to escort you from the premises." "This is my company," Julian roared, his voice cracking. "I built this. You can't do this." "It's the board's company," Marcus corrected him smoothly, "and they've made their decision. Don't make this uglier than it already is." In the silent, gleaming elevator descending from the 80th floor, the atmosphere was entirely different. I still can't believe it was you, Yumi said, her voice soft with wonder. When I saw you at the restaurant, I thought my mind was playing tricks. Then I saw how he treated you, and I got angry. It wasn't just a hope that you'd be here, Ilara. When I confirmed the catering contract, I called the manager. I made sure your route today would take you past the boardroom at exactly this time. I left the door ajar myself. Ilara stared at her, the final piece of the elegant trap clicking into place. It wasn't fate, it was a calculated act of solidarity. Mr. Tanaka placed a hand on his granddaughter's arm. You saw a wrong and sought to right it. You tested not just the man's machine, but his character. It is the Yamato way. He turned to Ilara, his gaze kind. The Vance Tanaka Foundation will ensure your brother receives the best medical care in the world. He will be flown to our medical center in Kyoto. That is my promise. Your only concern now must be your work. Ilara felt a decade of crushing weight lift from her shoulders. For years, every waking moment had been a calculation of survival, rent, bills, Leo's next treatment. The freedom was so sudden, so absolute, it felt like learning to breathe again. She instinctively touched the sleeve of her worn cardigan, the wool a familiar, comforting texture. It was no longer a symbol of her hardship, but a testament to her resilience. A link to the grandmother who had given her the knowledge, and now the key to her future. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate but all she had. Say nothing, Mr. Tanaka said with a gentle smile. Show us. Show the world what a human heart can build. The elevator doors opened onto a bright, sunlit lobby, the world outside waiting for her. Back on the 80th floor, Julian was being marched through the open-plan office he had designed. The walk of shame was excruciating. Hundreds of employees, the people whose careers he held in his hands just an hour ago, stopped typing and stared. The sound of 100 keyboards falling silent was louder than any shout. Their faces were a mixture of shock, fear, and in more than a few, a flicker of grim satisfaction. His personal phone, now disconnected from the company network, felt like a dead brick in his pocket. The security guards allowed him 5 minutes in his cavernous corner office to gather his personal belongings into a small cardboard box. He stumbled inside, the panoramic view of the city now feeling like a cage. On the wall-mounted newsfeed, headlines were already flashing, each one a nail in his professional coffin. Yamato merger dead, Etherian. Stock in freefall. Insiders cite catastrophic failure of leadership from CEO Julian Croft. Marcus Thorne appointed interim CEO. The unseen scholar. Who is Ilara Vance? He stared at his reflection in the dark floor-to-ceiling glass. He saw a man in a $5,000 suit who had lost everything. He had built an empire on the idea that he could see and know everything, that data was the ultimate truth. But he had been blind to the history woven into a sweater, deaf to the poetry hidden in a line of code, and ignorant of the quiet dignity of the woman who served him his wine. He sank into his chair and, out of pure instinct, tried to log into his terminal. A red box flashed on the screen, access denied. The final digital execution. His Synapse lens lay on the desk, a small, useless piece of silicon and plastic. He had designed it to translate the world for him, but it had never taught him how to understand it. Time's up, sir, one of the guards said, the honorific now sounding like a final, mocking insult. Julian stood numbly. He picked up the small, pathetic box containing the trinkets of his hollow life. As he turned to leave, he looked back at the desk. He left the lens there. It was a monument to his blindness, a relic of a future that would never be. He was stripped of his technology, his power, his future. He was an analog ghost in his own digital world. The security guards led him to the executive elevator, the same one he had ridden up that morning, a king surveying his domain. Now it was a tumbril carrying him to his social guillotine. When the doors opened on the ground floor, he wasn't met with the respectful quiet he was accustomed to, but with a chaotic swarm of reporters and flashing cameras. Marcus had been thorough. The betrayal was not just corporate, it was public. Mr. Croft, is it true the Synapse lens is a failure? Julian, can you comment on the allegations of gross misconduct? What was your relationship with Ilara Vance? Is it true you compared a family heirloom to a cat bed? The questions were a barrage of noise and light. He flinched, shielding his face with his cardboard box. Without his lens to filter the world, to feed him data and talking points, the raw, chaotic input was overwhelming. He was just a man, exposed and helpless. The guards pushed a path through the media circus, their faces impassive. They deposited him unceremoniously on the pavement outside the gleaming tower that bore his name, a name that was now synonymous with failure. The automatic glass doors slid shut behind him, sealing him out of his own world. He stood there on the cold concrete, the November wind biting at him, a man in a bespoke suit, holding a cardboard box, as anonymous and insignificant as any other person on the crowded street. A news van idled at the curb, its massive screen replaying an image from the press conference Marcus was now holding inside. Julian saw his own face, a picture of smug confidence from a magazine cover next to a photo of Ilara. Her face serene and intelligent. The chyron beneath read, "The Fall of a Titan, the Rise of a Visionary." He looked up at the tower of glass and steel, his monument now belonging to another. He had seen the world in data, in net worths and probabilities, but he had never truly seen the people in it. And now they couldn't see him. He was just a shape in the crowd, a blurry data point, left with nothing but the deafening sound of his own ruin.